If every container on your patio needs water every single day, the summer heat may not be the only problem. The deeper problem may be the crops you chose, the pots you placed them in, and the way you taught their roots to depend on small, frequent drinks. You can water at sunrise, come home in the late afternoon, and still find drooping leaves, hot pot walls, and soil that looks dry enough to crack. That can make a container garden feel impossible during a drought. But it is not impossible. It simply has to be designed for the season you actually have, not the mild spring weather you wish would last all year. Today we are looking at 18 edible container crops that can handle hot, dry summers better than many common garden favorites. Some tolerate intense heat but still need dependable moisture while they flower and fill fruit. Some can handle short, dry periods once their roots are established. And a few are genuinely comfortable with less frequent watering, as long as the soil drains well and the container gives their roots enough room. By the end, you will know which crops belong in each group, when each one still needs water, and how to build a container that makes every watering last longer. There is one important rule before we begin. Low water does not mean no water. A plant can survive dry soil and still stop producing food. A pepper can stay green while dropping flowers. A tomato can remain alive while fruit growth slows. A melon vine can look strong until the roots become too dry during fruit expansion. The goal is not to test how long a plant can suffer. The goal is to water less often, water more deeply, and protect the harvest. One of the toughest edible plants on this list may already be growing in a place where you have been pulling it out as a weed. We will come back to that plant later. First, we need to fix the container system that decides how long every drop of water remains available to the roots. Start with soil volume. A tiny pot can turn into a hot, dry box in a single afternoon. A larger container contains more soil, and more soil changes temperature and moisture more slowly. That does not mean every plant needs a giant tub, but it does mean the container must match the crop. A thyme plant can live comfortably in a modest pot. An eggplant, okra plant, or melon needs far more root space. When a large crop is squeezed into a small container, the roots fill the available soil. Water disappears rapidly, and the plant becomes dependent on rescue watering. The material matters too. Fabric grow bags release moisture through their sides. That airflow can be useful in cool or wet conditions, but during dry heat, it can make the root zone lose water much faster. Terracotta also allows moisture to evaporate through the pot wall. A light-colored plastic container usually holds moisture longer than a dark fabric bag or unglazed clay pot. Dark pots placed directly on sun-heated concrete can become especially harsh because the roots are exposed to heat from the air, the sun, and the surface below. If possible, move those pots away from the hottest wall. Place them where they receive morning sun and some afternoon protection, or raise them slightly so air can move underneath. Now look at the potting mix. A good summer mix needs two qualities that sound contradictory. It must hold useful moisture, but it must also drain enough air to the roots. A mix that is almost entirely coarse bark or very light material may dry too fast. A mix made from heavy garden soil can become dense, airless, and difficult to re-wet evenly. A balanced container mixed with compost and water-holding organic material can stay moist longer without remaining saturated, especially when the pot has clear drainage holes. Be careful when peat-based potting mix becomes completely dry. It can pull away from the sides of the pot and resist water. You may pour a full watering can over the surface and watch the water race down the gap between the dry root ball and the container wall. The center can remain dry even though water is pouring out of the drainage holes. When that happens, do not flood the pot all at once. Apply water slowly, pause, and water again. Several gentle passes give the dry mix time to absorb moisture from the outside toward the center. Mulch is one of the simplest ways to protect a container. A layer of clean straw, shredded leaves, fine bark, or another suitable organic material keeps direct sunlight off the soil surface. That reduces surface crusting and slows evaporation. Leave a small open ring around the stem so moisture does not remain trapped against the crown. Mulch is not permission to ignore the pot. Lift it occasionally and check the soil beneath, because ants, slugs, or fungal growth can hide under a layer that is never disturbed. The way you water matters as much as the amount. A quick splash wets the top inch and encourages roots to remain near the surface. A slow, deep watering allows moisture to reach the lower root zone. Water until the root ball is evenly moistened and excess begins to drain. Then let the plant use part of that moisture before watering again. The correct interval changes with the crop, pot size, wind, sun exposure, and local climate. That is why a rigid calendar is less useful than learning how each pot feels when it is ready. Use 3 checks before you water. First, move the mulch and feel the soil below the surface. Dry mulch does not prove the root zone is dry. Second, lift the pot slightly or tilt it just enough to feel the weight. A wet container feels very different from the same container after much of the water has been used. Third, look at the plant early in the morning. A plant that droops at 4 in the afternoon but stands upright the next morning may be reacting to heat, not experiencing a root zone emergency. A plant that is still limp at sunrise deserves immediate attention. Group containers by water need. Fruiting crops that are flowering or filling fruit belong in a priority zone. Established leafy crops and vigorous legumes can form a moderate zone. Mediterranean herbs that prefer drier roots should stay separate. If rosemary shares a pot with a thirsty vegetable, one of them will usually be unhappy. Either the vegetable becomes too dry or the rosemary remains too wet. With that foundation in place, we can begin with the familiar crops. The first 6 can handle intense summer temperatures, but several are far less drought tolerant than their tough-looking leaves suggest. The first crop is the cherry tomato. Tomatoes are not true low-water plants in containers, but cherry types are often more practical than very large slicing tomatoes when summer conditions become difficult. Their smaller fruits require less time and fewer resources to mature. And many vigorous cherry varieties can continue setting at least some fruit through periods that cause larger fruited plants to slow down. The important word is practical, not drought-proof. Give one tomato plant a generous container with dependable drainage. More soil protects the roots from sudden changes in temperature and moisture. Cover the surface with mulch, but keep it away from the stem. If your patio receives brutal afternoon sun, protect the pot itself and preserve enough healthy foliage to shade developing fruit. Removing too many leaves during extreme heat can expose tomatoes to sun-scald and increase stress on the remaining canopy. The most important time to avoid severe drying is when the plant is flowering and fruit is expanding. Irregular moisture can interrupt fruit development and increase the risk of cracking or other quality problems. Do not wait until the entire plant collapses before watering, but do not respond to every afternoon droop with another shallow splash either. Check the soil below the mulch and look again in the morning. When you water, soak the full root ball slowly. Harvest ripe cherry tomatoes often. Regular picking reduces the load on the plant and keeps overripe fruit from splitting or attracting pests. During a heat wave, you may also pick fruit once it has begun to color and allow it to finish ripening indoors. That can protect the harvest without forcing the plant to carry every tomato through the hottest days. Cherry tomatoes belong in a water-wise garden only when you are willing to give them priority during flowering and fruit filling. They are heat-capable crops with manageable fruit, not plants to abandon between waterings. If you want tomatoes but cannot check a container regularly, use a large pot, protect the root zone, and keep the number of plants realistic. 2 plants crowded into a pot that should hold one will use water faster than either plant can tolerate. The second crop is the hot pepper. Peppers often look remarkably calm in high temperatures. Their leaves may remain firm while lettuce, peas, and other cool season crops have already disappeared. But a pepper can appear healthy and still drop flowers when heat and water stress arrive together. That is why the plant may survive while the expected harvest quietly vanishes. Plant 1 pepper in a container that provides enough soil for a mature root system. Small ornamental style pots dry too quickly for a productive summer plant. A hot pepper usually handles short dry intervals better after it has established roots, but young transplants need consistent moisture. Do not train a new pepper to be drought tolerant by repeatedly allowing it to wilt. Early stress can limit growth before the plant has enough roots and leaves to recover well. When the soil is ready for water, soak it deeply. Avoid the cycle of bone-dry soil, followed by constant saturation. If the pot has become severely dry, rehydrate it in stages. In desert climates, some late afternoon protection can reduce flower loss and keep the container from overheating. In humid climates, preserve airflow and avoid keeping the foliage wet for long periods. Hot peppers often continue producing better when mature fruit is harvested. Pick peppers at the stage you prefer instead of leaving every fruit on the plant. A heavily loaded plant uses water to maintain leaves, flowers, and developing peppers at the same time. Regular harvesting removes part of that demand and encourages additional growth when conditions remain favorable. Fertilizer is not a substitute for water. Never apply a strong feeding to dry roots in the hope of forcing new growth during a heat wave. Rehydrate the plant first, allow it to recover, and feed only when active growth has resumed. Excess nitrogen can also produce a large, thirsty canopy without solving flower drop. Peppers teach an important lesson. Heat tolerance does not guarantee fruit set. The plant can look alive and productive from a distance, while the flowers tell a different story. Check beneath the canopy. If blossoms are falling, the solution may be steadier root moisture, cooler afternoon conditions, and patience until temperatures become more favorable. The third crop is eggplant. Its broad leaves make it look like a plant that should lose water rapidly, and in a cramped pot it often does. Yet eggplant loves warm weather and can remain productive through summer when the root zone is large, evenly watered, and protected from extreme heat. Choose a deep, stable container and avoid placing multiple full-sized eggplants in space meant for one. A crowded pot may look lush early in the season, but every extra stem and leaf increases water demand. As roots fill the pot, the margin between adequately moist and dangerously dry becomes very small. One strong plant in enough soil usually gives you a more manageable system than several stressed plants competing in the same container. Mulch is particularly helpful beneath eggplant because its broad canopy still leaves patches of soil exposed as the sun moves. Water at the soil level and check the pot carefully while flowers and fruits are developing. Eggplant can recover from temporary afternoon droop, but repeated deep wilting can reduce flowering and leave fruit small or tough. Harvest fruit while the skin remains glossy and the flesh still feels firm but not hard. Leaving oversized, dull fruit on the plant directs energy toward mature seed rather than continued production. Regular harvesting also reduces the amount of fruit mass the roots must support during hot weather. Watch the undersides of the leaves. Flea beetles, mites, aphids, and other pests can weaken the canopy, and a damaged plant handles drought poorly. Water management works best when pest pressure, nutrition, and airflow are also under control. Eggplant is a good choice for a gardener who can provide a large container and dependable deep watering. It is not the best choice for a tiny pot on bare concrete. The crop tolerates heat, but the container must protect the roots from rapid drying. The fourth crop is Armenian cucumber. Despite the name, it is botanically a melon, and that helps explain why it often handles summer heat better than many ordinary cucumbers. It produces long, mild fruits that are used like cucumbers, and a vigorous vine can keep growing when conventional cucumber leaves are struggling. But vigorous growth does not remove the need for water, while fruit is elongating. Give the vine a large container and a strong trellis. A vertical plant uses less floor space, but it still needs substantial root volume. Do not crowd the base with too many vines. A few well-supported stems are easier to water, inspect, and harvest than a tangled wall of foliage. In windy locations, secure the trellis so the root ball is not repeatedly pulled and disturbed. Water deeply around the root zone and keep the surface mulched. The plant may tolerate a little drying between thorough waterings once established, but fruit quality is better when moisture does not swing wildly. Severe stress can produce slower growth, misshapen fruit, or a stronger flavor than expected. Harvest Armenian cucumbers while they are young enough to remain tender. Leaving long, mature fruits on the vine increases the load and allows seeds to harden. Frequent picking gives the plant a reason to continue flowering, and makes each watering support useful harvest rather than oversized fruit. Keep enough foliage to shade the fruit. A vine stripped too aggressively can expose tender skin to intense sun. Remove damaged or diseased leaves when necessary, but do not turn pruning into a contest to make the vine look sparse. In hot climates, the canopy is part of the plant's cooling system. Armenian cucumber earns a place in this list because it combines heat tolerance, vertical production, and repeated harvest. It still belongs in the priority watering zone when several fruits are expanding at once. The next crop makes that relationship even clearer, because the size of its fruit determines whether it belongs in a water-wise garden. The fifth crop is the small fruited melon. A melon is not a low-water plant, in the same way rosemary or purslane is. Its leaves are broad, its vines can become extensive, and its fruit contains a great deal of water. Still, compact varieties with smaller fruit can be reasonable container crops for hot summers when they are grown in enough soil and managed carefully. Use a large container or grow bag, and remember that fabric will dry faster in wind. Support climbing vines on a trellis and use slings for fruit if necessary, or allow the vines to spread where the fruit will not rest on scorching pavement. Keep the root zone mulched and protect the container from the most punishing afternoon heat. Moisture is especially important when the plant is flowering, setting fruit, and expanding that fruit. This is not the moment to prove how drought-tolerant the vine can be. A small melon may require fewer resources than a giant variety, but it still depends on a functioning leaf canopy and an adequately hydrated root system. Limit the plant to a realistic number of fruits. A container vine carrying more fruit than its roots can support will struggle even if you water frequently. Removing weak or late fruit can allow the remaining melons to develop more reliably. As harvest approaches, some gardeners reduce irrigation slightly to avoid overly rapid fruit swelling, but that should never become severe wilting. Use the plant and soil as your guide. A melon vine that is repeatedly collapsing is not concentrating flavor. It is losing the ability to fill and protect its fruit. Small melons belong in this video because they can produce in heat, and because selecting smaller fruit changes the water equation. They do not belong in the low-priority watering zone. When fruit is developing, give them attention before you water established herbs. The sixth crop is compact summer squash. It grows so quickly that a young plant can make a container look full in a matter of weeks. That fast growth is one reason gardeners love it, and one reason it can become thirsty. Large leaves lose water. Tender stems react quickly to dry heat, and each developing squash is mostly water. Choose a bush or compact variety and give one plant a large container. The leaves need room for airflow, and the roots need enough soil to buffer heat. A small pot can force you into daily watering even when every other part of the system is correct. Keep the surface mulched and place the container where bees can reach the flowers. Water at the soil level. Wetting leaves does not solve dry roots, and in humid conditions it can encourage disease. When the plant is flowering heavily, check whether female flowers are being pollinated and whether young fruit is beginning to grow. A fruit that stays tiny and begins to rot may have failed pollination rather than suffered from drought. Harvest summer squash while the fruits are young and tender. A forgotten fruit becomes large very quickly and demands resources the plant could use for new flowers. Frequent harvesting is one of the simplest ways to keep a container plant productive with a limited root system. Watch for squash vine borers, squash bugs, mildew, and damaged stems. A plant weakened by pests or disease becomes less efficient with water. If the canopy is heavily damaged, pouring more water into the pot may not restore production. Diagnose the plant before assuming every wilt is thirst. Compact squash is useful in a hot container garden, but it is not a crop to leave dry for long periods. It belongs in the first group because it can handle warmth and produce quickly when water is supplied intelligently. They are heat-tolerant crops whose harvest can be protected with larger containers, cooler roots, and priority watering at the right stage. This is the point most drought gardening lists leave out. Surviving heat is not the same as producing food with dry roots. A tomato may remain green while fruit growth stalls. A pepper may preserve its leaves while dropping blossoms. An eggplant may recover after wilting, but lose tenderness and production. A cucumber, melon, or squash may look vigorous until several water-filled fruits begin competing for moisture. From this point forward, the standard becomes stricter. The next crops can generally handle short, dry periods better after establishment. They still need water to germinate, root, flower, and recover from harvest, but they are less likely to demand constant rescue once mature. Their roots, growth habits, or adaptation to hot climates make them more forgiving. The seventh crop is okra, one of the most dependable fruiting vegetables for genuinely hot weather. When tomatoes pause and squash looks exhausted, okra often keeps growing upward and opening new flowers. Its deep, vigorous root system helps an established plant use water from a larger volume of soil, but that advantage only works when the container is deep enough. Give each okra plant generous vertical root space. Do not crowd several plants into a small bucket simply because the seedlings look narrow. A mature okra plant can become tall, leafy, and top-heavy. The container must hold enough soil and remain stable in wind. Young plants need consistent moisture while roots are developing. Once established, okra can tolerate short, dry intervals better than many common fruiting vegetables. But repeated severe drought can still reduce flowering and pod quality. Harvest pods while they are young and tender. Okra can move from ideal to fibrous surprisingly quickly in hot weather. Frequent picking keeps the plant producing and prevents old pods from directing energy into mature seed. Wear gloves or long sleeves if the leaves and stems irritate your skin. Do not panic at every slight afternoon droop. Check the root zone, especially if the plant stands upright again the following morning. But if leaves remain limp at sunrise, buds are dropping, or pod growth slows, water deeply. Established okra is forgiving. It is not indestructible. Okra is an excellent choice for a gardener who wants repeated summer harvest from one container. It combines heat tolerance, a manageable crop load, and better drought endurance than many large fruited vegetables. If you can grow only one fruiting crop in a brutally hot location, okra deserves serious consideration. The eighth crop is cowpea, including black-eyed peas and many southern pea types. Cowpeas are closely associated with hot climates for good reason. They establish rapidly in warm soil, tolerate summer conditions that slow common beans, and can provide edible pods, fresh peas, or dry seed depending on the variety and harvest stage. For containers, choose a bush or semi-vining type unless you have a sturdy support. Give the roots room and avoid sowing so densely that the plants form a thirsty mat. Crowding can erase much of the crop's drought advantage because too many stems compete for the same limited water. Keep the seedbed moist enough for germination and do not allow young seedlings to dry repeatedly. Once the plants are established, let the upper layer of soil dry somewhat before watering deeply again. During flowering and pod set, check more often. Cowpeas tolerate dry conditions better than common beans, but a hard drought at bloom can still reduce the number of pods. Decide how you want to harvest. Pick young pods for fresh use when the variety is suitable, shell peas at the fresh stage, or allow selected pods to dry for seed. Harvesting regularly can extend production, while leaving every pod to mature shifts the plant towards seed completion. Cowpeas also contribute diversity to a container garden. Their flowers attract pollinators, their roots host nitrogen-fixing bacteria when properly nodulated, and their foliage can shade the soil. But do not describe them as a fertilizer machine that eliminates the need for soil care. Much of the nitrogen they capture is used by the plant and eventually removed with the harvest. Cowpeas handle heat with confidence, but the next crop turns the same warm season bean strategy into a vertical harvest. The ninth crop is the yard-long bean. It is also called asparagus bean or Chinese long bean, and it thrives in heat that can make ordinary snap beans stop flowering. The vines climb rapidly, which makes this crop useful on a small patio where vertical space is available. A tall trellis turns one large container into a productive wall of foliage and hanging pods. Give the roots more soil than the slender stems appear to need. A vigorous vine can empty a small pot quickly, especially when hot wind moves through the leaves. Sow only enough plants for the container and remove weak seedlings instead of allowing all of them to compete. Secure the trellis before the vines become heavy. Yard-long beans tolerate heat very well, but pod production still benefits from deep watering when the plants are flowering. If the root zone dries too severely, blossoms can fall and pods can become shorter or tougher. The goal is to allow a moderate dry down, not to create repeated wilt. Harvest the pods while they are slender and tender. Their name does not mean every pod should be left until it reaches maximum length. Frequent picking encourages continued flowering, and young pods are usually better in the kitchen. A few overlooked pods can be allowed to mature for seed, but most should be harvested promptly. On a balcony, protect the trellis from strong wind. A container that tips over can tear roots and destroy the advantage of a healthy, established plant. In very dry climates, grouping the bean pot near other containers can reduce wind exposure, but do not pack the foliage so tightly that airflow disappears. Yard-long beans are ideal for gardeners who want a repeated harvest without devoting much floor space. They need more water during bloom than the strongest drought crops on this list, yet they generally handle summer heat far better than standard green beans. The 10th crop is the tepary bean. This is one of the clearest examples of a crop associated with genuine hot, dry adaptation. Tepary beans have a long history of cultivation in arid regions of the American Southwest and northern Mexico. They can mature with less water than many common beans, but they are not a universal solution for every climate. Tepary beans perform best in hot conditions with excellent drainage. Persistently wet soil and humid weather can be more troublesome than short dry periods. In a container, use a mix that drains freely. Provide full sun where the plant is adapted, and avoid keeping the pot constantly saturated. At the same time, maintain enough moisture for germination and early root development. Drought tolerance develops with the plant. It is not present in a newly emerged seedling with a tiny root system. Choose a variety suited to your region and intended use. Tepary beans are generally grown for dry seed rather than large quantities of tender snap pods. That means the payoff arrives later than it does with yard-long beans or cowpeas. During flowering and early seed filling, severe stress can still reduce the harvest. Do not assume that because the crop is drought adapted, it should be planted in a miniature pot. A reasonable soil volume gives the roots room to explore and helps the container avoid extreme temperature swings. The advantage of the plant is that it can use limited water efficiently, not that it can produce a full crop from a handful of overheated soil. Tepary beans are most compelling for gardeners in hot, dry areas who want a crop with a real history of arid adaptation. In a humid coastal summer, they may be less reliable than cowpeas. This is why a water-wise list must consider climate, not merely label a plant as drought-tolerant and send it everywhere. The 11th crop survives short dry periods in a completely different way. Sweet potatoes build a vigorous network of roots and vines, shade their own container, and store energy underground. Once established, they can handle heat and temporary dryness better than many common vegetables. But if you want a useful root harvest, they still need enough soil and reasonably steady growth. Start with healthy slips that have begun forming roots. Plant them in a large container or grow bag with loose, well-drained mix. A fabric bag can work well for harvest, but in a dry, windy location, it may require more attention than a plastic container. Mulch the surface early and allow the vines to spill over the sides or spread where they can shade the pot. The leaves themselves are edible, which gives sweet potatoes an additional advantage. You can harvest a modest number of tender shoot tips for cooking, especially from vigorous plants. Do not repeatedly strip the vine if your main goal is large storage roots. The plant needs leaves to capture energy and send it underground. Established vines can remain surprisingly calm during heat, but extended drought can slow root development. Extreme swings from dry to saturated are also unhelpful. Water deeply, allow some drying, and check the pot before the vines begin to wilt severely. In late summer, a dense canopy can hide how dry the soil has become, so reach beneath the leaves and test the root zone. Do not count on a specific weight of sweet potatoes from a container. Yield depends on variety, season length, soil volume, temperature, and how much leaf growth the plant maintained. The honest promise is that sweet potatoes combine edible leaves, heat tolerance, soil shading, and the possibility of a root harvest in one crop. The 12th crop is amaranth. Depending on the variety, it can be grown for tender leaves, ornamental color, or nutritious seed. It thrives in heat, grows quickly, and can tolerate short dry periods after establishment. The biggest mistake is sowing it too densely. A packet of tiny amaranth seed can produce far more seedlings than one container can support. If they remain crowded, they create a shallow mass of roots and compete aggressively for water. Thin the seedlings early. For leaf production, allow several well-spaced plants and harvest young leaves or tender tips. For grain, give fewer plants more room to build strong stems and flower heads. Young amaranth needs dependable moisture. Once established, it becomes more forgiving. But leaf quality is still better when the plant is not repeatedly pushed into severe stress. After a heavy harvest of greens, water deeply so the remaining stems can produce new shoots. Amaranth also changes the visual character of a container garden. Green, red, and burgundy varieties can create height and color while remaining edible. Just remember that a large seed head can make the plant top-heavy, and self-sown seedlings may appear later if mature seed is allowed to fall. The 6 crops we have just covered reduce the need for constant rescue. Okra, cowpeas, yard-long beans, tepary beans, sweet potatoes, and amaranth all tolerate heat and short dry intervals better than the first group once established. Yet the final 6 ask even less from the garden because most are harvested for leaves or herbs rather than large, water-filled fruits. The first of those final plants is the one we teased at the beginning. It may already be growing in a crack, a neglected pot, or the edge of a garden bed where you have been treating it as a weed. The 13th crop is purslane. Its smooth, fleshy leaves and reddish stems store water, allowing the plant to tolerate heat and drying that would quickly damage tender salad greens. It can spread across the soil surface, shading the container as it grows. That combination makes purslane one of the strongest, genuinely low-water edible plants on this list. There is an important safety rule. Eat purslane only when you have identified it correctly and know that it was grown in clean soil without herbicide, pesticide drift, pet waste, roadside pollution, or other contamination. Do not gather an unknown plant simply because it resembles a photograph. Grow a named, edible variety from seed or a trusted plant source if you are uncertain. Purslane does not need a very deep container, but it appreciates a broad surface where stems can spread. Use a free-draining mix and avoid keeping the root zone constantly wet. Water young plants while they establish. After that, allow the upper soil to dry before watering again. The succulent leaves act as a buffer, and the plant usually gives clear signs before serious damage occurs. Harvest tender stem tips and young leaves. Cutting the tips encourages branching, which creates more harvest points. Do not allow every stem to flower and scatter seed unless you want purslane returning throughout the garden. It can be enthusiastic once established. This plant is a powerful answer to the question that opened the video. Some edible crops truly can live with less frequent watering, but they do so because their structure and growth habit are adapted to it. Purslane does not need to fill a large fruit with water. It stores moisture in its own leaves, keeps a low profile, and continues growing in conditions that make lettuce bolt or collapse. The 14th crop is Malabar spinach. It is not true spinach. It is a tropical vine with thick leaves and succulent stems, and it thrives in warm weather that makes ordinary spinach disappear. It can cover a trellis, provide repeated harvests of young leaves and tips, and turn a narrow balcony into a vertical edible screen. Give Malabar spinach a large container and a sturdy support. The vine can become heavy as it climbs. Keep young plants evenly moist until the roots are established. Mature vines tolerate heat very well, but they produce the most tender leaves when the soil does not remain dry for too long. In a desert climate, afternoon protection and a well-mulched container may be necessary. In a humid climate, the plant often grows vigorously, but good airflow is still helpful. Harvest the tender tips regularly. Each cut encourages side shoots and keeps the vine within reach. After a strong harvest, water deeply so the plant can replace the removed growth. If the vine is allowed to become a tangled mass, the center can become difficult to inspect and harvest. So guide stems along the trellis rather than letting them wrap around one another without control. Malabar spinach is valuable because it provides summer leaves without the same water demand as a large fruiting crop. It is not as drought tolerant as purslane or rosemary, but it remains productive in heat and can tolerate a moderate dry down once established. For a hot, humid region, it may be one of the best leafy choices in the entire list. The 15th crop is New Zealand spinach. It is also not true spinach. Instead of climbing, it forms a spreading plant with branching stems that can trail over the edge of a wide container. It tolerates heat far better than ordinary spinach and can provide tender tips through much of summer. Start it in warm conditions and maintain moisture while seedlings are small. Once the plant has filled the container, it can handle brief dry periods. But regular deep watering improves regrowth after harvest. Choose a broad pot, space plants so they are not crowded, and let some stems spill over the side to shade the soil. Harvest young tips rather than allowing every stem to become long and coarse. Repeated light cutting encourages branching and keeps new leaves coming. Prepare and use the leaves appropriately rather than assuming every spinach substitute is eaten exactly like baby spinach. The value here is reliable summer growth, not an identical texture or flavor. New Zealand spinach is particularly useful when you want a low, spreading edible plant instead of a vine. Pair it with a container system that retains moisture, and it can bridge the hot period when cool season greens are unavailable. It is more forgiving than lettuce, but less comfortable with extreme drying than purslane. The final 3 crops are herbs, and their greatest danger is often not drought. It is a gardener who keeps the roots wet because every other container on the patio is being watered. These herbs evolved with leaner, drier conditions. They need drainage, airflow, and the chance for part of the potting mix to dry between waterings. The 16th crop is rosemary. A mature rosemary plant can tolerate dry conditions far better than most vegetables. Its narrow, aromatic leaves reduce water loss, and its woody structure supports steady growth without the demands of large fruit. Yet rosemary commonly fails in containers because the roots remain wet for too long. Use a pot with unobstructed drainage and a mix that does not stay saturated. Do not allow water to collect in a saucer beneath the container. A newly planted rosemary still needs regular observation, while roots move into the fresh mix. Once established, water deeply and wait until the upper portion of the soil has dried before watering again. Avoid placing rosemary in the same container as a vegetable that needs constant moisture. Companion planting sounds attractive, but plants sharing one pot must share one watering schedule. Rosemary and a thirsty cucumber do not want the same root environment. Give rosemary its own container or pair it only with plants that prefer similar conditions. Harvest by cutting tender stem tips without removing too much of the plant at once. Do not cut every branch back into old, bare wood. Regular light harvesting keeps the plant compact and gives you useful growth for the kitchen. In cold winter regions, container rosemary may need protection because a pot exposes roots to lower temperatures than the ground does. Rosemary is one of the best low water choices for a sunny patio, provided the gardener can resist unnecessary watering. If the leaves are green, the soil below the surface is still moist, and the pot feels heavy, leave it alone. The 17th crop is thyme. It stays smaller than rosemary, which makes it practical for a balcony, a narrow ledge, or the edge of a sunny patio. Its tiny leaves and low growth reduce water demand, and an established plant can tolerate drying between thorough waterings. Use a container with excellent drainage and give the plant enough sun to remain dense and aromatic. Thyme grown in shade can become thin and weak, and wet shade is especially risky. Allow the top portion of the mix to dry, then water the root ball thoroughly. Do not offer tiny sips every day. Harvest the soft tips and trim lightly to encourage branching. Avoid cutting deeply into old woody stems, where regrowth may be slow. A modest pot can support thyme, but even a small herb suffers when roots are trapped in a shallow decorative container with no drainage hole. Keep thyme separate from plants that require constantly moist soil. It works well beside other dry-loving herbs when each plant has enough room, but a mixed herb pot should still be designed around compatible water needs. The 18th crop is sage. Its broad, textured leaves are larger than thyme leaves, but their soft, slightly fuzzy surface helps reduce moisture loss. Sage prefers sun, good airflow, and soil that drains quickly. Once established, it handles short, dry periods well and can provide repeated leaf harvests without the water demands of a fruiting vegetable. Give sage its own pot, or combine it only with compatible herbs. Water deeply, then wait until the soil has dried appropriately before watering again. In humid climates, avoid crowding the foliage because poor airflow can encourage leaf problems. Remove damaged leaves and keep the center open enough for air to move through. Harvest a few leaves or tender tips at a time. Heavy cutting during stressful heat can remove too much photosynthetic surface and slow recovery. Like rosemary, sage is a perennial in suitable climates, but may need winter protection in a container where temperatures fall sharply. Sage completes the list because it represents the central principle of a low-water garden. The easiest way to reduce watering is not to force every plant into the same routine. It is to select plants whose natural preferences already match the conditions you can provide. Now let us reduce all 18 choices to a simple plan. If your main goal is repeated harvest from a fruiting crop in intense heat, start with okra, cowpeas, yard-long beans, or a hot pepper in a generous container. Okra is especially useful in dry heat once established. Cowpeas are excellent for hot southern conditions. Yard-long beans make the best use of vertical space. Hot peppers remain familiar and productive when their flowering stage is protected from severe stress. If you want edible leaves, choose according to climate and space. Purslane is the strongest low-water option and fits a broad, relatively shallow container. Malabar spinach is excellent where summers are hot and humid and a trellis is available. New Zealand spinach spreads through a wider pot. Amaranth gives both edible leaves and the possibility of seed, while sweet potato vines can provide a modest leaf harvest and shade their own soil. For a low-water herb pot, choose rosemary, thyme, or sage. Do not water them simply because you are watering the tomatoes. Check their soil separately. A simple 3-pot starter garden can include 1 fruiting crop, 1 leafy crop, and 1 herb. In the first pot, plant okra or a hot pepper. In the second, grow purslane, amaranth, or Malabar spinach depending on your climate and available support. In the third, plant thyme, rosemary, or sage. This gives you 3 different harvests and 3 opportunities to learn how plants with different water needs behave. Arrange the pots in zones. Keep fruiting plants that are flowering or filling fruit closest to your water source. Put established leafy crops in the middle. Place the dry-loving herbs where they will not receive accidental runoff or automatic watering intended for thirstier plants. Before every watering, repeat the 3 checks. Move the mulch and feel the soil below the surface. Lift or tilt the pot enough to sense its weight. Look at the plant early in the morning. Then, prioritize. A newly transplanted seedling needs attention before an established rosemary plant. A melon filling fruit needs attention before dormant thyme. A pepper dropping flowers needs a closer look before purslane with firm, succulent leaves. Water slowly enough for the root ball to absorb moisture. If water rushes immediately from a dry pot, pause and return. Protect the surface with mulch. Keep dark containers off scorching pavement when possible. Reduce wind exposure without eliminating airflow. Harvest regularly so plants are not carrying old pods and oversized fruit through the hottest part of the season. Remember that climate change is the answer. A crop that excels in Arizona may respond differently in Florida. Dry heat increases evaporation, while humid heat can increase disease pressure and slow soil drying. Watch the pot you actually have, not a schedule created for another state. The goal is not to prove how long a plant can survive without water. The goal is to build a garden that uses every watering well and continues giving you something worth harvesting. You cannot control the temperature, the wind, or the arrival of drought, but you can choose crops that fit the season, give their roots enough protected soil, and water at the moments that protect the harvest. Start with 3 containers instead of rebuilding everything at once. Observe which pot stays moist, which plant recovers overnight, and which crop continues producing. Then expand with what succeeds in your own conditions. A water-wise container garden is not created by forcing thirsty plants to suffer. It is created by matching the plant, the pot, the soil, and the watering habit, so they work together. If one of these crops has already proven itself in your summer garden, share what grew well and what climate you are gardening in. Your experience may help another gardener choose the right plant for a hot, dry patio. And the next time you reach automatically for the hose, check the soil, feel the weight of the pot, and look at the plant in the morning. You may discover that the smartest watering is the watering the plant actually needs, not the watering the calendar told you to give.